they can hire the people.
Is that or?
Because I believe in the safety act. I just think it will be amended down the road. I think.
There'll be
you know,
some
I'm
changes to
hopeful,
it.
because there are
No.
counties down in southern Illinois that money can't do it.
Has everybody gotten a good stretch in?
It's gonna be interesting.
It is. Very interesting.
But do your yoga, we need some committee meeting yoga moves. Maybe we'll do that through public health. We'll start sending that out.
Yoga.
Goat yoga. Yeah, you could bring some goats in. You got some connections, I'm sure.
On
There'll be
your head road.
bits and pieces change.
I don't know how that works. Do the goats go on top of your back?
Yes.
Do they? Okay, so it wouldn't work with cows.
Mr.
pigs.
Kenyon does cow yoga.
They're 1,200 pounds. And then you're putting together an opportunity for all of us to contribute on what we think it should
That's,
be. but-
they've given that to me as well. I've not filled it out yet.
Let's give it another half minute till we get this train rolling.
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting.
How does goat milk compare with camel milk and cow's milk?
Been there for so long.
That's a Kenyan question.
Yes.
It's good as cow's milk.
Paul, her husband retired
Yeah.
a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to.
I do prefer a lot of the goat cheese, goat milk cheeses though. So,
Oh, I do too.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're really good.
One of my favorites,
Yeah.
especially the cheddar.
All right, is everybody ready to get started? Mr. Fraz, are you coming in?
County.
Oh, sure. All right.
Want slacks too. Oh my God. It's freezing. They bring a blanket.
I sat there the whole time. Sherman, now he runs over there.
Yeah, we're not waiting for Dale. Blair, you all good to go?
I don't even know my phone works, so I can't even poke.
All right, let's get this party started and in opposition to the idea of jinxing it, I'm gonna say I hope this is a very long meeting. And that all day. So the time being now 11:13 a.m. on Wednesday, August 3rd, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order of Kane County's American Rescue Plan Committee. Please call the roll.
Bates,
Bates here.
Brown, Froz,
I was here.
Gums,
Gums present.
Kenyon,
Here.
Leonard,
Here.
Martin,
Present.
Molina,
Molina present.
Strathman,
Strathman here.
Pepe,
Debbie here.
Shepro, Kirog,
Here.
Sanchez.
Rose present, sorry.
You have a quorum.
Okay, I'd like someone to ask unanimous consent to approve the minutes of July 20th, 2022.
Request unanimous.
Mr. Leonard asks, any objection? The minutes are approved. Public comments. Is there anyone in person or online who would wish to deliver a public comment on agenda or non-agenda items? I don't see any names I don't recognize online, so no one being here, I will move on. We have just a few discussion items for you today. And the first is the program manager update, Mr. Phillips.
Good morning. This is Peter Phillips, American Rescue Plan Program Manager, and I will just would quickly, because we're in the budget period, like to give you a brief overview of where we stand with the ARP consultant contract with Ernst & Young. If you see the screen, terms of the contract that the county executed last year on November 15th runs through December of 2024 for current services. The contract value is $1 million total. We established a not to exceed amount for essentially the first 6 months through May, so that we could get our bearings and understand exactly what the program was going to be, and we have an understanding of that. So of the not to exceed through May of 22 is $649,603.93. And invoice through April 30th thus far has been $358,478, or 55.18% of the not to exceed. the not to exceed balance remaining through May, and that invoice is probably being prepared now. It remains $283 and $44 rather, of the not to exceed amount remaining. The contract value remaining through December 21st of 2024 is $641.52. And that is the status of the Ernst & Young contract. I would suggest if anyone would like to discuss this or have any questions, I'm going to be available after the committee meeting. Of course, I am upstairs on the 4th floor in room 406. And I encourage anyone, if you would want to stop by, I can share any documents you want. Can also, if needed, prepare hard copies, and we have in the past gotten those to members in a variety of ways, and we'll continue to do so. And that's all I have today.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Are there any questions for Mr. Phillips on this?
Yes,
Madam
just-
Chair?
Thank you. I had a robust conversation with Mr. Ford, Mr. Coyle, Mr. Sanchez, and Mr. Phillips to discuss this contract and the payables. I have one recommendation that I'd like for this committee to be aware of, and I hope they'll be able to comply. When I approve these invoices, right now, all I see are hours worked, and that may be the approved manner that was agreed upon with Ernst & Young. But I really would like to get a summary of what was accomplished during that month, an aggregate summary, so that we can keep track of what we are paying our consultants for the work during that month. And it's simply very similar to what an attorney would do. Sometimes there are 6 different people who are logging in their hours. And through that, I just need to get some base knowledge of what they've accomplished. So a paragraph, simple paragraph, 4 sentences. This is what we did during this month to earn our keep. And I think that's a modest request. And I think that'll be effective for the auditor. I think that'll be effective for everybody, especially if the public wants to see what we are paying our dollars for. The other is that I believe, because if you notice, this goes up, and I just want to make the committee aware, this contract expires in 24. And Mr. Phillips, it's my understanding that our closeout will continue to 26. Is that correct?
Likely for some of us till 27, but yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And is it your thought that Ernst & Young is going to be needed till 27?
It is the intent of the program that they are not required through 27 unless on a standby consultancy basis, if we have needs or questions that we cannot self-serve through our finance department or state's attorney or the art program itself.
What I'm trying to drill down to is we must assure that there is money left in this budget, because we may need their services after the outcome of that conversation to assist with the detailed closeout, so that all reports are given effectively to the Treasury. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And approximately how much money should be put on reserve for that, to your best estimate at this time?
At this time, I don't have an estimate for that. We have begun considering this with Ernst & Young now that we have a historical experience behind us of the last several months. So we're going to have that conversation, especially with the budgetary work that the county is doing right now to project that. So we'll be ready to discuss that in coming meetings.
Okay, all right. So, Mr. Sanchez, can you bring that to us as soon as you have at least a baseline?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for calling for that meeting. It's very relevant. Those of us who are very close to the program and the inner workings know what's being done with the time, but it's good for everyone else to be included in that as well.
Mhm.
So we'll be forthcoming with that information.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Phillips? Mr. Brown?
Brown speaking, I'd like to be clear then, Madam Chair's first request of some narrative of what these hours are being spent on, that's gonna now start to be furnished, or I don't know if you answered that or not.
Yeah, we have already actually before that have talked to Ernst & Young to provide some detail for us for dissemination. So that will be part of it. And then also an estimate of closing costs.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Phillips.
I would, just to clarify, I do not expect that there would be necessarily a narrative with every, but yes.
A summary, please.
So, yes, so we're talking about that.
Shepro, question,
Mr. Shepro.
comment. I agree with Madam Chair's comments, except that I guess I remain skeptical that expenditures in that amount can be explained in a few sentences, but I guess maybe we'll wait to see what they tell us.
If I may, there's some suggestions, and I think Ernst & Young can consider this. I did ask for itemization at the beginning, and I was concerned that that would be an additional cost for that hourly rate, so that they would take time to do that. When I was consulting, that would just be my cost to do that itemization, rather than charging my client to itemize the work that I've done, because I summarized it. And I did it at the end of every day. And this was the work that I completed for that task. And then just kept it.
I have
So-
never heard of any professional that charges to prepare a bill or explain a
Yeah,
bill.
I know. So I think as much detail as they feel appropriate, within understanding.
We're not looking to show what was done every minute of work by Ernst & Young, but a general not concept, a general idea, big picture of what they've been up to. So if you see somebody worked 78 hours for us, what did they do? What does that consist of generally? We're not going to track when they went to the bathroom or anything like that. So, Mr. Leonard, did you have
Not at this time. Thank you.
any other questions? Oh, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, it might have been answered already, but I can see where Madam Chair is coming from on this, but I also don't want to make a big, long, drawn out deal. Because Peter and Jared, I'm sure that when these invoices come to you, you see them first before they go to Madam Chair. And you're fully aware of what they're doing for these hours, but to be more comfortable, I can see where Madam Chair is coming from on this, and we should all be more comfortable knowing that there's some narrative, some explanation to these hours that we're being charged.
Yeah, and it's good for just transparency.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments before we move on? No?
Yeah, I have a
Oh, Mr. Martin,
comment.
go ahead.
The more detailed your billing, the higher you can charge.
They charge enough. Charge enough.
I like to subscribe to Jacques Barzun's simple and direct method of writing. I'll just leave that there for you guys to Google. All right, let's move on. We have with us today Mr. Gary Berg from Ernst & Young, and he's going to discuss a conference that he attended in which some members of the U.S. Treasury Department gave some talks on best practices and usages of the money. And I think it's relevant for us to hear this information today because we are going through our own county budgeting process, and the American Rescue Plan money is always something that comes up. So without further ado, Mr. Gary Burke, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be back with the committee today to share some observations from the annual meeting of the Government Finance Officers Association. EY was a proud sponsor of the annual conference that was held in Austin, Texas during early June and was attended by more than 6,000 individuals. The majority of the delegates were from state and local governments. I took the opportunity to attend every session that had ARPA on its agenda. I heard prepared remarks and Q&A from panelists representing Travis County, the city and county of Denver, the city of Houston, the city of Duluth, Minnesota, city of Springfield, Illinois, and the town of Vienna, Virginia. I also attended a session in which several members from the U.S. Treasury discussed frequently asked questions and responded to a few questions from the other panelists. In addition, I had the opportunity to network with other representatives from various federal, state, and local governments. Chairman Sanchez asked me today to present my observations and specifically any themes that I took away from the conference. I would like to stress that these are my personal observations based on the sessions that I attended at the conference. There are 4 themes that I would like to highlight. The first is budget sustainability, and specifically how ARPA may create future budget constraints if used to purchase goods or services that will have costs after ARPA. A frequent example was hiring seasonal, temporary, or contract employees and not to use ARPA to hire permanent employees. The risk of hiring permanent employees related to how these employees would be budgeted for once ARPA had concluded. The other examples included the purchase of vehicles or construction of buildings that will have required maintenance in the future. The risk again being how those future expenditures were funded. The best practice presented was to align the timing of the ARPA funding to the term of the total expenditures, both current year and future budget expectations. One panelist indicated the annual cost of the project, that is after ARPA funding, is a component and part of the evaluation criteria of their funding requests. That session was appropriately titled "When the Free Money Runs Out." The second theme was the alignment of funding decisions to the existing strategic plans or previously communicated goals of the government. A number of the presenters indicated they made concerted efforts to ensure they communicated how the funded projects were aligned to the existing priorities of the government. The third theme was allowing citizens to provide input into how a portion of the total funding may be used. The method to provide that input varied, and most panelists indicated they had a public survey that provided citizens an opportunity to provide ideas. The presenters also stressed the importance of transparency and indicated they publicly disclosed parts of the evaluation criteria and the alignment of the funded projects to the priorities of the government. The final theme was the utilization of revenue replacement. The majority of the presenters indicated they would use some, but not all, of the revenue replacement available to their government. There was not a consensus to maximize the total available amount of revenue replacement for many of the larger recipients. Many of the presenters indicated the flexibility provided by revenue replacement was advantageous and may ease the burden of administering the funds. This sentiment about administrative burden was somewhat contradicted by the presentation by the Department of Treasury, in which representatives indicated Treasury is currently evaluating the applicability of certain federal compliance requirements on revenue replacement. Some of the presenters indicate they plan to use the standard revenue replacement amount of $10 million. This standard of $10 million is available to all recipients and does not require a calculation of actual lost revenues. It should be noted that recipients that elect the standard are effectively capped at $10 million and cannot exceed that amount for revenue replacement. So, Mr. Chairman, to recap, the four themes I took away from the conference were budget sustainability, and specifically how ARPA can create future budget constraints if used to purchase goods or services that will have costs after ARPA. The alignment of funding decisions to existing strategic plans or previously communicated goals of the government. Allowing citizens to provide input into how a portion of the total funding may be used. And finally, the utilization of revenue replacement.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Are there any questions? So there's those 4 points that he's bringing to us from the Treasury itself, or representatives of the U.S. Treasury Department. So again, it's very instructive and informative for our purposes going forward. Any questions or comments, Madam Chair?
Thank you. I was reading an article and then it was confirmed by another article that I read regarding the aggregate use of ARPA funds throughout the country. And the primary use of most of municipality county funds are for affordable housing, which I was surprised at. The second was for public safety. More money was spent on affordable housing. Second came in line was public safety needs. And the third was revenue replacement. So that came at high, top 3, but at the bottom of the top 3. We have not yet talked on this board at all about affordable housing options. And I do not think that that is really part of our strategic plan, although a great need, and we're going to have that conversation about workforce housing, which is what we would consider traditionally middle income. Maybe 10 years ago, and there's a range of what middle income is currently. What that really truly means is that over 100,000 per family, or less than that. But I just thought it was very informational. So as we look forward to allocating the rest, I like the idea of public comment. We can put out a survey. We have some time. We can have some broad stroke options. But if we do that, then we have to take a look at what our 2040 land use plan is and or our budget plan for strategy. Obviously, putting any of this money towards the Safety Act, needs of the Safety Act, that goes against what was said, don't hire staff unless we know that staff is going to be terminated after the money runs out. So it's a kind of a part-time kind of position that you're funded by grant for so many years, and then that position is done. So it's something to consider as we go forward, taking a look at how we're going to appropriately spend the rest of the money that we've been given, which is how much more we have, like 25 million in the bucket that is unaccounted for.
I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's much larger than that. I think we're somewhere around 60 million. That's
Is it 60 million? Okay.
specifically unallocated.
It's a significant amount of
We
money.
have conceptually allocated more than, we've got maybe 20 million that we haven't allocated conceptually in our spending. plan.
Conceptually, yes,
Yeah,
okay.
so
Okay.
if that's a distinction, then yeah, about
Okay.
20 million.
Very good. Thank you.
Sir, are you looking for the treasurer's office? Excuse me, sir? Are you looking for the treasurer's office? Oh, you're here for this meeting. Okay. A lot of time people walk in and they think they're going to pay their tax bill. So just wanted to make sure. Any other questions or comments on Mr. Burke's presentation? Okay. Mr. Burke, will you be able to send this out in like a memo form to the members of this committee?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Well, or send it to Peter and he'll make sure it gets out to everyone. Other than that, I think that's it. I'm surprised there's no, Mr. Tepe.
Are you ready for item C under part 4?
Unless there's anything else for B.
I'd like to discuss this report a little bit more because
Ms. Bates?
it seems so important and brief. I'd like to get a feeling, was on the revenue replacement, was it the consensus or the feeling at the conference that $10 million was the right amount to use, or that was a typical amount to use?
Yeah, one unfortunate benefit of the conference is that there was representatives from a wide span of governments, both large and small. And so with that, especially with the state and local funding that comes from the Treasury, 10 million may represent an entire recipient's full allotment of funds, where it may represent a very small portion of another entity's receipt of funds. So
Okay.
there wasn't much discussion about the appropriateness of the $10 million. I think a lot of the smaller recipients were appreciative that they didn't have to go through a lot of effort to calculate lost revenues and could take that standard.
Okay, like a standard tax deduction. One more question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Bates.
Was there much discussion of what we are calling our community support grants? Things that would go directly to the community? Or was that not, I don't think that was in the scope of any of these discussions.
No, that wasn't a thematic because at the time, this was in early June, some were still trying to program their funds, still trying to figure out how they wanted to best deploy it. But again, there was the theme of getting getting feedback from the community
Okay,
into the needs and using that feedback and part of the criteria for green lighting and funding projects.
green lighting, pardon me?
Funding projects.
Okay, all right, so that could include community input on community support grants. Okay, thank you.
And we did gather input for the community support grants from organizations that provide those types of services. And I know Madam Chair and I have both discussed at various times the concept of more of a county-wide survey or something along those lines. So we're looking into options on that just to incorporate more of the public's feedback because it is recommended by the Treasury Department. So,
Okay, good.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Excuse me. And one of the things that during that conversation I had with Mr. Sanchez and support staff when we were taking a look at the administrative costs of all of the, how many community support grants did we send out altogether besides the big 6?
42, somewhere around there, 40, yeah.
40? The small allocation, and this varies, so it's generalized speaking. If the organization has all of their paperwork together and is tightly organized, the oversight cost from Ernst & Young is low. But if it's not, and there has to go the paper chase and questions back and forth, that hourly rate goes up. So my takeaway was that, is that if we're going to be moved forward, that we may want to have less grants so that more money can go into the grant and less money goes into administrative costs. Does that make sense
Yes.
to everybody? So potentially, and I'm using very hypothetical, if we have an organization that is noteworthy and needed, and we fund them $15 million, let's say, or $15,000, because there are some grants for 15,000, and they are, paperwork is not organized, it could cost up to $3,000-4,000 just to administer the grant. So we want to make sure that we have an understanding of that going forward so that we can spend as much money as we can. And God bless, Gary, really appreciate your work and honor it. But I'd rather give it to a food pantry, perhaps, rather than administrative costs, and keeping our administrative costs as low as we can.
Agreed.
And I hope, and no offense, sir.
No offense taken, Madam Chair. I appreciate the comments.
You know, as stewards of this money, obviously, we want to be very mindful of how we use it and not have excessive costs that could be avoided. So I think imagining that we will be discussing at some point the possibility of more community support grant in some form or another. We'll have to have that administrative cost factored into the conversation, and we've got a better understanding of what those costs may be now that we've actually been administering this first program. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Bates.
Please. And maybe we can get our organizations, our agencies to be more organized. If that's what it takes, we can say, get your paperwork in.
I think they just need to hire administrators. That's it. That's the answer.
Okay, thanks.
Inside joke from executive committee. All right. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Tepe?
You ready?
I'm ready. We can. Well, we got to get through it, Kenny. The only way out is through, man. Let's move on to C, other committee matters. Mr. Tepe, you have something to bring forward?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm concerned about the ability of this committee and to get things done in a timely manner. And I want to use a different example first. And that is, some time ago, the board selected the Illinois Housing Development Authority to handle the funds we received for rental assistance. And when we questioned them, that they assured us that they would be responsive and applicants would not receive the same kind of experience that they had in the past. Well, that's not been the case with them. I know of at least one instance where an application was made in January, finally approved in early July, and the landlord has yet to receive the funds that were approved. Not only that, when that landlord calls and asks about the funds, there's no way he can find out when he's going to get paid. So here he is agreeing not to evict the tenant, agreeing not to charge them late fees. And it's been 7-8 months that it takes him to get his money. So how is that as an introduction to this point? So now we have this new ARPA committee. We've hired an administrator and contracted with a firm that charges us $300 an hour. Grants that were passed and approved by the board in April, at least in one instance, have yet to be distributed. Okay. And that organization doesn't know why. So we have the dollars, they need it. Why does it take 4, 5, 6 months to distribute funds?
To be very brief, Mr. Tepe, because it is a complex process in putting together a program of this size. It doesn't happen overnight. It requires a lot of conversation and meeting between our consultants, our staff, and our state's attorney's office. And as you'll see, when we get some description of the billing, a lot of time was spent putting this program together on the back end. Now it's up to the organizations who have all received the necessary documents that they are required to fill out and send in if they want to be reimbursed. So each of those organizations has their own timeline. They have their own organizational capabilities. Some are ready to go and have already sent in expense requests, and checks have started to go out. Other organizations we have not heard anything from. Mr. Phillips does reach out to some. If there's a hangup, they reach out to him. They say, hey, where's my check? What's going on? And he explains the situation and finds out the information. Outside of that, there's nothing that this county could have done really to speed things up. If we had the back end for this program created when we approved it, we probably would have fulfilled more than half of the requests that will come in. But it's taken some time, and now it's on those organizations to send in those expense requests. Because once they send in an expense request, we have a timeline. We have a flow of anywhere from, I believe, 12 to 21 days where they send in their expense request. It goes through our process. It gets vetted by Ernst & Young. It goes to finance. It goes to the auditor. It goes to the treasurer. Treasurer cuts a check and sends it out to them. So anywhere from 12 to 21 days for that process to ensue, depending on the department's workload. So if there's any concern about organizations not receiving money quickly enough, I encourage you to reach out to them and really get them to start sending in those expense reimbursement requests.
So how many firms have not been paid yet from those that we authorized 4 months ago?
I don't know that number off the top of my head, but Mr. Phillips's last presentation to us showed the status of organizations at that time. So you can refer to that, just get an idea of where we were 2 weeks ago. I don't know if there's been any changes, but there are quite a few that are going through the process. And I believe, how many have received checks to date, Peter?
To date, 6 have received checks to date.
That's out of some 30 that we authorized?
That's out of
46 altogether.
46. So 6 checks out of 46 that we approved 4 months ago. And the blame is all on them for not filling out paperwork. That's questionable in my mind.
Well, I think if you listen to what I just said, I described that it takes a long time to put a program like this together. And when did the expense reimbursement packets go out to the final organizations?
The reimbursement, the
Yeah.
spreadsheet and request for expenses, they went out. I don't know the date off the top of my head, but it was the spring. It probably aligns with April.
Mhm.
11th, April 11th, I think.
So these organizations have had the documentation they need to ask us for the reimbursements for a couple months now. And if they're not sending them in, there's nothing we can do to speed that up. But if you would like to know more details about the work that went into creating this program, the laborious process that we had to undergo, we can set up a meeting at any time or reach out to Mr. Ford and Mr. Coyle, Assistant State's Attorneys, and they can give you a lot of detail because they've been right there with us the whole time.
I'll follow through with the detailed request associated with the one organization that I talked to yesterday.
Excellent. Madam Chair.
So just to, so I have it straight in my mind. Peter, this is all a reimbursable program as set forth by the Treasury. So it's not just here's your grant for, I'll use my $15,000 hypothetical organization. So we've allocated them, they're aware that they have a $15,000 reimbursable grant. So we have sent sometime in April, the form, the spreadsheet, the requirements for reimbursable expenses. How long does this organization have to send their checks out or their receipts to us, I should say?
At this point, we have not established a deadline for submission of expenses. We're at the point where we're going to create a deadline in the future. near future. But we have not had a deadline.
When is the grant closeout?
The grant closeout for the community support grant is 2024.
So they can, with that $15,000, not expend any money this year. They could possibly expend it next year or the previous year. So they could spend the money in 23, they could spend the money in 24.
If they chose.
So we have no control of that. So it remains open until that organization decides to close it out.
Yes, it does. If I can interject, and I would also say that this program was developed as a near-term solution because there are a lot of needs in the nonprofit space and the categories we selected. And so it's assumed that all of these organizations have the need that they requested money for, and that they're putting together their paperwork as quickly as possible because that money is waiting for them.
It is, but it's up to them.
It is up to them, but we are assuming that they are working as quickly as they can to put the paperwork together for reimbursement. Because they've all got expenses. The expenses can go back to March 3rd of 2021. So I would theoretically, every single organization would be able to find expenses going from the date of the program start back to March 3rd, 2021. So if they just do that paperwork and they find all their eligible expenses going back to March 3rd, I think many of them would be able to just turn in one expense request and get all of that money in one shot. But it depends on the administrative capability of each of those organizations.
So it's been out there for 3 months. And I think would probably be a good idea if perhaps you would consider maybe by September, if you've not heard from organizations by September, because that'll be 6 months then that they've had it, to follow up and ask them what their plans are, how they're doing, to confirm that they are aware that this money is waiting for them.
Our expectation was that that was going to take place in the next couple of weeks. So that should happen before September.
Okay, excellent.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tepe brings up some points that concern me. I understand that there were 46 applications that were approved or agreed upon, and 6 have been paid, and the other 40 have not responded yet. Just a couple of basic questions. When the notification went out to these people, that additional information.
Louder, please.
When the information was given out or sent out to these applicants that they were approved, but we needed additional information, was there confirmation that they received it and who received it? And was, as Madam Chair said, there was no time frame put on responding back to that. If they applied for a grant, they knew what expenses they had lost or had incurred. So I don't understand why we don't have a time frame on this request for additional information. Quite honestly, I think 90 days would be more than enough. We've gone by that now, so maybe we have to send something out, but I would confirm number one, and I was wondering if it was confirmed that they did receive the request and that they realized time was of the essence in responding to it.
To your first point, we have a tracking system, a grant application system named Submittable. Our communications to and from most of the communications to and from the recipients is forced out from that platform. So we have a tracking of communications. We do not have a means by which we are able to be notified whether or not they have opened the email.
Could you ask for a confirmation from them in that request?
I think that that platform has that capability. I have to investigate that.
I just think it would be important that we know, number one, that they got it, the right person got it, and then some kind of time frame put on it. All of these applicants are in need, and for them not to respond over a 90-day period, there's something missing in the communication. I'm not blaming anyone here, but I'm saying we need to confirm, number one, that they got it. Number two, that they need to respond within a timely manner, whatever period that is. And then once we get that information, of course, release the funds. And I just don't think that system has been set up well enough to track everything and to have funds sent out efficiently and quickly.
Sure. I would like to clarify one thing. We have many more many of the applicants have submitted. Have about 23 that have submitted expenses. And I have a status report that I initially sent out last Friday that I'll send out every week that tracks, that shows the organizations that have submitted, those that are in review, those we were in a process of waiting for further information. So I think one of the issues is that the Treasury requirements for the compliance and reporting is such that it presents a lift for the organizations to provide backup for the dollars that they have they are requesting reimbursement for. It has to track from their account. And if they're using a third-party payroll system or another vendor, those vendors have to provide backup, and includes copies of checks. It is laborious. It takes a lot. We are checking up with and in contact with these organizations. Some that have not submitted yet are simply small organizations that are one-person shop, and they have multitude of checks that they have to retain or obtain copies of. That takes footwork on their part. So there are not any that I'm aware of that we have not heard from whatsoever. I can certainly document that and provide a report on that and the status. But also, if in the vetting process, if we need further information, we try to communicate that through email to save time. If the email process does not work, we have to schedule a call with our consultants and the organization, and we've done a number of those. I wouldn't say there's a lack of responsiveness on the awardee's part, or certainly not on the county's part. But if we require additional information from an awardee, if we are at a stage of vetting their expenses and we have to schedule a call with them, as we schedule a call with them, we are going on to other packets that we have that have the backup, and we're processing those as they come. Now, the spigot is really starting to open. Just last week, we had 2 of the big six that had submitted expenses. As of today, all of them have. That's $333,333 of expenses that we then have to vet for the counties, ensure the county's integrity and the compliance in 2027. So it is, as Mr. Sanchez had alluded to, there is a process. I think I need to communicate that process to you all better, and we will in the future. And I'm taking heed of the observations that you're making.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Sanchez,
Ms. Bates?
please. I would like to bring up the topic of the community support grants as other committee matters. I did follow up with Heather Bender from Rebuilding Together Aurora. And I believe that our community support grants, our second tranche, we should broaden our scope from homeless to on the verge of homeless, and from food insecurity to on the verge of food insecurity. So I think there's a very real need. I think our first tranche was emergencies. Let's give people, homeless, food insecure, and serious mental health. Now, I think a second tranche of possibly $10 million could go out to the community in the form of a more broad scope in our community support grants. And I would like to suggest that we have a subcommittee formed for the community support grants for those of us on the ARP committee who are who would want to have contribution to this new plan, this new strategy and new tactics for helping the community, and to do the community survey that that Ernst & Young is suggesting. And I'd like to take into account Madam Chair's suggestion that fewer, bigger grants would use less administrative money. Balance that with many small grants, can help more organizations. But I'd like to propose a subcommittee to start working on our next tranche for the community support grants.
Thank you, Ms. Bates, for your comments. And obviously, as you can see, we're pretty well underway with working on the current community support grant program, and then the department requests is occupying the majority of the rest of our time outside of reporting as well, I should say, month-long reporting months. So I will follow up with you outside of committee, and
Great.
we will work to
Thank you.
talk about how to
Perfect.
best strategize that concept.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from anyone? Madam Chair.
At our next meeting, will we be able to get an update about our internal requests?
There will be just a spreadsheet updating where we're at in the process. We can just speak to that briefly about where we're at.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Our de-
We're approaching readiness to draft resolutions for some of the projects. I don't know if that will be at our next meeting, but I'll give you a status update.
There, we've got, if I may, the economic development request for the Economic Development Council study has a little bit more thought behind it. We have an opportunity to develop a regional approach for economic development, and without having a direction and funding to be able to support that, that opportunity may not include Kane County. This would be a consortium of all the collar counties, including Cook County. We agreed in principle, and I put principle in quotes because we can all go, yeah. But if all works well as was agreed upon, that this would truly be an opportunity if a company is interested in establishing its presence here in this part of Chicagoland, if I can use that phrase, and they find that DuPage County would be okay, but they'd like to take a look in Kane County. Unless we're part of the program, Kane County would not be referred to. And at this point, Kane County has no economic development director. They could go to Aurora, they could go to Elgin, and they do a good job of representing sometimes our other communities. But each one of our communities has their own separate economic director, and there's no holistic approach to this, which we could provide working as oversight. And we've had conversations with all of the individuals who represent economic development throughout Kane County, and we have got unilateral support on the need for this. So my concern is that the slower we take the lost opportunity, we're going to continue to have this. So I would like to move that as quickly as possible, as appropriate, because I know everyone else has got need, but this will bring money to Kane County, because there'll be new business opportunities for us presented to us. And that is always good.
And since you brought up the development department requests, we're actually very far along in assessing those. And we're at the point of just figuring out the best way to structure them so that they're compliant with the ARPA. But I would guess that those will probably be the first projects that will be coming forward.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you.
Anything else from anyone online? Hearing and seeing none, I think Mr. Kenyon's up.
I'd move we adjourn since we've satisfied almost everybody.
Almost everybody.
I second that.
Leonard seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.